Hi, and welcome to Time Equation, YouTube channel of a passionate watch collector. On it, I talk about watches, showcase my personal collection, and make difficult choices. Today, we're trying to answer a question all watch collectors dread. If you had to slim down your collection and let any of the pieces go, how would you make that choice? To collect means to invest yourself deeply in a hobby, and emotional attachments, even with inanimate objects, form rather quickly when you care about something. Therefore, letting a watch go isn't as easy as it may seem. So I've distilled it down to a science, putting aside sentimental value and ultimately trying to decide which one of my watches is simply better than the other. In this edition of the difficult choice, I'm deciding between two legendary manual wound chronographs, both with long service records in aviation and spaceflight. And definitely the models you think of first when their respective brand names are mentioned during conversation. This is Breitling Navitimer versus the Omega Speedmaster. We're going to compare and score both in the following categories: the case, the dial, the movement, the complications, and the strap. Starting off with the case. The case category encompasses the entire construction of the watch. We're looking at the dimensions, materials, finishing, water resistance, and the crystal. The Navitimer comes in a stainless steel case with 41mm in diameter, on which two types of finishing can be found. The case features brushed sides and polished lugs. The lugs are also gently curved, making the watch sit a little lower on the wrist. On the front, there's a 1950s era accurate dome plexiglass crystal, and the back is just a simple screw-down steel case back. Speedmaster, on the other hand, comes in a case made completely out of ceramics, with almost identical finishing patterns to the Navitimer. Brushed surfaces can be found on the sides and polished on the lugs. It is a slightly larger case, 44.25mm, with very little lug curvature. On the front, there's a slightly curved sapphire crystal glass, but the back is wide open. Protected by another crystal, it makes the movement visible for the wearer's enjoyment. Additionally, it has a bezel that's part of the case. The engraved tachymeter scale is well loomed and pops in the dark. Love a little touch on the dark side of the moon. Between the two, Speedmaster is the clear winner in this category. Ceramics are a technically more challenging material to work with, especially when trying to achieve the contrasting finishing Omega manages to pull off on the case sides. And there are benefits to choosing this material as well. It doesn't scratch, which makes this particular watch look as good as the day I got it. Something similar can be said about the crystal. While I do appreciate Breitling's commitment to a faithful reedition, sapphire is clearly a better material choice for the watch crystal. And while I don't have any scratches on my Navitimer just yet, they do remain a looming threat. Not something I worry about when wearing the Speedmaster. And ultimately, the movement can be seen on the Speedmaster. A magnificent thing to behold, with lots of interesting details to be found from each viewing angle. Round 1 goes to the Omega Speedmaster. On to the dial round. The Omega Speedmaster certainly has an interesting and a unique dial. Through the partially skeletonized dial, you can see the movement just behind. Laser ablations are used to engrave the surface of the moon onto it, which really gets you into that dark side of the moon aesthetic. On the edges of the dial, there's a minute track, executed as a racing style and laid on top of the dial, just like the chronograph subregisters that are used to measure the elapsed time. Our indices are applied and exquisitely loomed, however time legibility is seriously impacted by the low contrasting hour hands. And the big yellow chronograph seconds hand doesn't help with legibility either. There are times where it can be hard to even ballpark what the time is, as that chrono seconds hand can obscure whatever is found behind it. Overall, the dial is playful. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it does put design and aesthetics before everyday usability. The Navitimer is the complete opposite. It leans hard into its tool watch purpose, and as a tool, it tries to give the wearer as much information as possible. The ultimate analog flight computer on pilot's wrist. That matte black dial makes the watch readable under any light condition. Arabic numerals it uses to mark the hours are all hand-painted and simply pop in the dark. Also, the contrast between the dial and the syringe-style hands is excellent. You can read the time in an instant. While the dial is busy, it is made like that for a reason. Within that small space, Breitling managed to pack time in unit conversion, rate of ascent, and fuel consumption calculations. And while reading the time is easy, the rest of included functionalities require a little patience to master. Very few watches can pull off that organized mess kind of an aesthetic without being too overwhelming to look at. While this is a difficult choice to make, for me, the Navitimer takes the round. In my humble opinion, a watch is an accessory with a function, telling the time being the most basic function it performs. So a watch must do that well. The time should be easy to read under any light condition. And I do find myself taking a second look way too often when wearing the Speedmaster. Chrono seconds hand either gets in the way or the light doesn't hit the hands just right and they end up blending with the dial. While the Navitimer packs way more functions than the Speedy, I don't really use them. It is nice to be able to use the watch for quick multiplication and division. That is certainly handy and something I do use from time to time, but the rest of its functions are just there to remind me of what this watch is and who it is truly made for. Navitimer equalizes the score. It is 1-1 now. Round 3. The movement. While the Navitimer is a re-edition of a 1959 original, the movement is nothing but modern. The in-house B09 caliber it uses is based on the current era Breitling B01 movement. The main difference between the two being that this Navitimer is manually wound. Losing that rotor has made the movement slightly slimmer, however, that did nothing for the height of the watch, as the rotor saving is negated by the curved plexiglass crystal on the top. It even ends up being slightly taller than the B01 version. This is still a vertical clutch column wheel chronograph with crisp actuation, zero jump or stagger when using the elapsed time functions. Beating at 28,800 vibrations per hour, it even sounds like a modern-day movement. And like any other Breitling in-house caliber, B09 is machine finished. Unfortunately, due to the closed caseback, you can't really see that. Being a faithful reedition does come with era-specific drawbacks too. Finally, the crown is simply a joy to use. It can hack the movement, so the watch can be synchronized with the reference time. It's also very easy to place in the time setting position. Excellent winding feeling. And the crown gives very clear feedback when the watch is fully wound. Omega Speedmaster feels like the complete opposite. Its caliber, 1869, is based on the Lemania 1873 movement, which was originally designed and produced in the 70s. Nothing wrong with that, as the movement has powered countless watches over the decades and years since. It is truly battle-tested across many generations of watch enthusiasts, but it does show its age when compared to the modern Swiss watchmaking techniques. Unlike the Navitimer, it uses a cam-actuated lateral clutch for chronograph actuation. And while this is a close to perfect implementation of the system, you can frequently see it jump or stagger starting. That, and its slower beat rate at 21,600 vibrations per hour, make it feel a little dated. Machine finished as well, but just a fantastic movement to look at. Laser ablations on its plates and bridges paint the picture of the dark side of the moon. Mechanical components and purple jewels shimmer in the light, completing that moonwatch aesthetics. This is a watch you could almost wear upside down to show off that movement, if that wasn't completely ridiculous, that is. But its crown is not a joy to use, at all. The movement isn't even a hacking one, so any time synchronization is impossible. While winding the watch is fine, and the feedback the crown gives when the watch is fully wound is also fine, setting the time is simply a pain. you have to dig in below the crown to grip it with your fingernails, and that can take a few tries to do just right. I mostly keep it running and fully wound to avoid dealing with this altogether. This category comes with a clear winner. Breitling Navitimer has a more modern and a superior movement. You can hack it and set it to a reference time. The movement accuracy is also guaranteed to be within COSC specification. It also behaves a lot better as a chronograph due to its architecture choices. The column wheel makes the actuation crisp, consistent, and audible. And between the two, the Navitimer is way easier to operate. The crown grips well and pulls out easily. With that, Breitling takes the lead. It is Navitimer 2, Speedmaster 1 now. Round 4. The complications. Which are unfortunately identical for these two watches. Both of them are chronographs that measure up to 12 hours of elapsed time. Even their sub-dial register layouts are identical. Preferring one over the other is a difficult choice. However, it is a choice that must be made, or there's a risk of having a tied result. One must be better than the other, even by just a hair. After careful deliberation, I've decided that the Navitimer is a better chronograph. The decision came down to the design choices Breitling made when making the watch. It has a more modern movement that ticks at 4 Hz. With no jump or stagger, it allows tracking time with a high degree of precision. The dial is graduated to follow that beat rate. With it, events can be timed with 1/5 of a second accuracy. On the other hand, while measuring longer elapsed periods, the hour sub-dial register clearly marks every hour and half an hour intervals. That makes it a little easier to read than the Speedmaster, which by no means is a bad chronograph, but it tracks time with 1/3 of a second accuracy, and its elapsed hours are numbered in 3-hour increments, which is slightly less convenient than the Navitimer. We're splitting hairs here really, as this is a very difficult category to score, given that these watches have identical purposes. But between the two, the Navitimer is just a little easier to use as an everyday chronograph. That's why it takes this round. Current score, Navitimer 3, Speedmaster 1. Final category, the strap. Speedmaster comes on a very interesting strap. It is made out of fairly thin sheet of flexible leather, which allows it to hug the wrist nicely. There's really no need to break it in, just strap it on and it's good to go. Day 1. And even though it's a leather strap, at its top there are quite a few perforations. Those are there to make the wrist breathe during hot summer days. A detail that might be overlooked by some, but is very much appreciated, even if only subconsciously. What won't get overlooked though is the cool yellow stitching on the edges. This strap just goes so well with the dial. It is clear that thought has been put into how well these two complement each other. Masterfully done. On the other end, the buckle is made out of ceramics, just like the case. And like the case, it has both brushed and polished surface finishing. You're simply not going to scratch this watch on either of its ends. Omega paid attention to every detail when designing this strap. Even the portion of the strap that is typically just a hole punch, here it is nicely bolstered. Rubber segment is sewed into the leather, making the whole strap feel solid and durable. There's hardly any wear and tear on this watch, and it's been worn quite frequently for around 2 years now. That's simply astonishing. Truly a high quality piece from Omega. Navitimer, on the other hand, is, well, disappointing in comparison. Its strap is made out of thick calfskin leather, and it takes quite a while to break in. I endured almost a whole week worth of pain trying to mold it to my wrist. You could speed that up and age it a bit by rolling the band, but that could also crack the beautiful matte black skin. So I chose not to do that. Experiencing wrist pain wasn't fun, but the band ended up looking a bit better because I did. Now, after more than a year and a half of almost constant wear, it feels great, like it was meant for me and my wrist. But in all honesty, it just isn't a great strap, and I doubt that it will last very long. The very tip of the strap already needed to be glued back on, as the very motion of doing the strap up has caused the top layer to separate a bit. You can't notice it now, but I find this typical for most Breitling leather straps. Either the top starts disintegrating or the loop that holds it in place does. It seems inevitable after just a year or so of ownership. That's why people recommend going with deploying buckles for their straps. This tank type just doesn't last very long. Speaking of which, the tank itself looks great. Like the Speedmaster, it has two sets of finishes. Brushed sides with a bit of polish on the beveled profile. It is nice and secure, but nothing to write home about. While neither of these two straps will last for a lifetime, Speedmaster is a better choice by far. Omega made a strap comfortable to wear from day one. It has a breathable leather design, its aesthetics complement the watch nicely, leaving you with a feeling that those two belong together. It is also very well built, as it shows no wear and tear on its punch holes and the loops. That makes the Omega Speedmaster the undoubtable winner in the strap category. With that, the final score is Navitimer 3, Speedmaster 2. Which makes this Breitling Navitimer winner in this difficult choice. Breitling Navitimer is a fantastic watch. It is a vintage-style chronograph with a modern beating heart. Perfect choice for those that want to experience a part of aviation history on their wrists. For those that want to feel transported back to the days when the analog computers, like this one, helped pilots traverse the ocean. There is beauty to be found in the warm glow of its crystal, when it lights up under the light of a rising sun just peering over the horizon. One of a kind, the iconic Breitling Navitimer. This was a very difficult choice to make. A thought experiment in reducing my ever-growing watch collection size. For now, just a thought experiment. But should it become anything more, I now know which piece would stay and which would need to go. I invite you to follow my watch collecting journey by subscribing to my channel. That way you'll get notified and discover the watches I'm choosing between next. Until then.